Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my amazing co-host, Donovan. And today we have a special guest, Shane Manier. She is a creative coach, a visual artist, a Tedx keynote speaker, trauma-informed care instructor, poetry mentor, national spoken word poet, and founder of the Guerilla Poets, a nonprofit art collective dedicated to empowering others through the arts. Please welcome Sean. Thank you so much for joining us. It sounds like you've been up to a lot of things. That's really cool.
Yeah, I wear a lot of hats, but it's all good. It's one of those like multi-passionate, lives I get to live. So
awesome.
That whole refusing to choose, right?
Love it. Love it. I can relate to that. Excellent. So yeah, tell us a little about your story and what was your path to becoming a creative coach?
So I grew up traveling, and I grew up in a really weird dynamic. I grew up around the Hells Angels and biker gangs and construction workers. My father built glass factories for a company called Southern Industrial. And so we just moved from job site to job site. So I lived this kind of very gypsy-esque life with very little rules, right? Which got me into a lot of rebellious trouble, but also instilled that kind of carving my own path, and this sense of independence. And a lot of my work centers around this weird sort of like Americana spirit of like frontierism and, just that kind of whole vibe, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because I was experiencing so much and I was like usually the only child present, it needed to go somewhere, right? I had to express myself somehow. So as soon as I was able to pick up a pen, I was writing poetry, I was drawing art, I was expressing myself in these forms. And what was really cool was that, my dad and my mom and all the bikers and construction workers were actually really supportive over it. And so it was like this really weird dynamic of like this gentle energy and then this rough energy, right? Where, there'd be a bar fight, but then I would be like 7 and I'd be like, look at the pretty sunset. And the bikers would be like, oh, that is beautiful, and then go back into the bar. It's like, it's this really weird dynamic. But I'm so thankful for it, because it made me prolific and it really instilled that multi-passionate, path for me. When I got older, I just knew that I wanted to be involved in the arts in some way. And it's taken a while to develop like what I actually want to do and get specific with it. And I didn't even know creative coaching was a thing until you're scrolling on social media and then there's like an ad and you're like, did that say creative coach?
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Is that
a thing? And I looked into it and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for free for years. And I'm like, you can charge people for this? Yes, you can. And yeah, I started getting my feet wet with it. And I realized like, wow, I really love this. I really love connecting the dots for people and incorporating their creativity into their business if they haven't already. And also how to cultivate their creativity and turn it into revenue streams. And I've found that a lot of creatives struggle because for me, I think it's more a myth that they've bought into, that they can't plan and they can't like follow through and follow up. And so I help creatives like plan and, do those executive functions where it's like, okay, here's your dream. Now let's solidify it. And here are the action steps to get there. And I've found that I get to like geek out on personal development and like time management while also, being in the creative world, which to me is like a marriage of two loves, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting parts of your background and how they've kind of influenced the path that you've ultimately landed on. I'm curious from the standpoint of, this artist or this creative spirit. It almost seems like generically it might be at odds with kind of coaching, right? So I'd be curious how you kind of approach some of those pieces. I personally don't think they're at odds, but I could see how it's like, the stereotype of like, I want to be free artist, do whatever I want. Like, how do those two things mesh?
No, that's a great question, y'all, because seriously, it's again that mindset of, oh, if you're a free spirit, then there's like this stereotype of like you're a flaky artist, all those things, like you say you're going to be there but you don't show up. And like for me, because of the rough atmosphere, like these men were getting arrested for like violence, they were getting killed, they were, I was very aware at a young age that like we ain't going to be here forever. And I remember like we would be out to eat and like we would get done at the table and I'd be like, okay, we finished our food, let's go. And everybody would just be sitting there talking and I'm like, okay, let's go. Like I'm like 7, what have I got to do? Like, like where do I have to be? But I would remember just like this constant sense of urgency. And that to me led into time management and things like that, because I did have so many things that I wanted to do and they were important to me. And I was very aware of, our own, mortality, that I knew that I had to get good at scheduling and planning if I wanted to achieve all of them. So that is what led me to being like, okay, we need to get it together. Like this is like, life is not a joke. And I think I'm really grateful for that, because it taught me like, if you're not careful, like you're not serious and focused, like you can end up years later not knowing what you've done with your life. Because I saw it happen to some of those men. And the wild thing is, last year I was teaching an art program at Rowan Helping Ministries in Salisbury, and it's like a homeless shelter. And some of the men that were in my program were like, knew the men who worked for my father. And I remember leaving there and just being like, wow, like that could have been me. That could have easily been me. But I was just cultivated with like, yes, you can go out here and do your art and your poetry, because my parents really wanted to instill that independence in me. And because of that, I didn't, I ended up being like, okay, I know it's possible. Like, let's get serious. So yeah, it's been a journey, y'all.
It sounds like it. Definitely. Actually, it was kind of coincidental or serendipitous in that my meditation this morning, I'm doing the 21 days of a meditation challenge with Deepak Chopra. It's the Getting Unstuck one that they newly released, that he's doing with Oprah. And today Oprah was talking about, she actually quoted Elizabeth Gilbert today from her book, Big Magic. I'm going to butcher this, but Oprah was saying, well, Elizabeth wrote about talking about creativity, which is like what the topic is for this podcast today. And what she was saying, it's like, it's not necessarily for like what we see in our mind as like these artists, free-spirited hippies, but it's actually tapping into yourself and discovering yourself. I think that's what she said. But yeah, what would you say about like how poetry and art, or that creative side of us, can help us discover more about ourselves and maybe even help us perform better at work for those who might not consider themselves that artsy, perhaps?
Definitely. And I love that whole concept, because I think people do see artists and creatives, right? We have a term called creatives, but like, I don't know if you've ever watched the documentary, The Creative Brain, I think it's called, but it actually talks about why humans, all humans are creative, because there's 2 parts in our brain that are spaced further apart. And a lot of animals don't have that. They're closer together. And so creativity is actually in that space between those 2 parts of the brain. And it's for our survival. And so it goes on to talk about how like every human is creative, whether that's in solving, problems, or, coming up with solutions, even just day-to-day decisions, choices. And I always tell my students, whenever someone says, oh, I'm not an artist, I always say that we're all artists because we're all made of art. And that to me is like that. It is like discovering who you are. And I feel like every time you write a poem or you sit down to draw something, it is you asking yourself, who am I? What do I want? What am I not going to put up with? And what's going on in my life right now? And I think that the arts in general is like the key, the gateway to personal development and healing, like, because it allows that invitation to like, what is going on in my life right now? What do I need? And it helps you solidify who you are and who you want to become without having the pressure of the conversation as it would be if it was an external, force, right? If someone was like trying to put their agenda onto you or their perception onto you or any of that junk, you can write through it or you can like draw through it and come back to self. So I totally agree with that. And that's another reason why I think it's so vital for us to have practices in the arts, and access to them as well. Yeah.
So that kind of draws me back to something you were talking about before, as far as businesses, right? And being able to get things off the ground and whatnot. I'm curious how you see kind of these pieces of, I guess, more formal arts, I guess is what I'll call them. I don't know, like writing, drawing, these types of things, as opposed to more general creativity, I guess, right? Because most jobs, most things are going to benefit from having some amount of creativity. And if they don't, robots are going to end up automating that away in no time. So I'm curious how you see kind of this interplay between, these more formal arts, I can't think of a better phrasing for this, and sort of this creativity in the work domain and what the crossover there is.
Oh, there's a huge crossover, which is why there's so much potential for creative coaches. So if anybody out there is watching this and you are interested in being a creative coach, like, please listen to this next thing that I'm about to say. Businesses sell emotion. They don't sell products, they sell emotion. That's right. How do you convey emotion? Through the arts, right? When I knew that I definitely wanted to be a bit like a creative coach, is I was sitting down with a client. I love this story. This is like one of my favorite client stories. I'm sitting down with a client who is a financial coach. Like, they help people get, financial freedom. And this guy is talking to me and he's like, I really like spoken word. I really like poetry. And I just haven't done it in so long. And I'm thinking about tapping back into, the scene or whatever. And, and I asked him, I'm like, have you incorporated spoken word at all into your business? And he's like, no. And I'm like, if you open up one of your seminars with a spoken word piece about being debt free, you've got everybody in that building. Like, they are going to want to buy from you. They are going to want to work with you because you're going to make them feel something, and you're going to make it vulnerable and transparent and personable. Like, you're going to be like the Tony Robinson of the financial world. Okay. Like, why are you not opening up your seminars with a spoken word piece about financial freedom? And his whole face just like lit up, and he was like, oh, I've never thought of that. And like, that is how those two can intersect, right? Like, and I think especially with everything that's happened this year and everything that's happened last year, businesses are very aware of how they're being portrayed to the people as a whole, right? We've got people who will call you out if you are not, doing what you should be doing for, social, standard, right? And as we should. But one way to do that is through, like, when you start to sit down and look at your business and look at what are my values, what are these things, the arts really can help with that. I've gotten onto a lot of nonprofits too who want diversity on their board, and they just think that they can just go out and get a bunch of diverse people and put them on the board without anything. And it's like, no, like, that's not going to be a safe environment for people you are bringing in. Like, how is the culture of your business? Like, how are you cultivating that? And again, the arts help cultivate a culture within a business, because it is human to human relation, and you can have tough conversations while doing art that you can't have just person to person in a meeting room, So that's what I would say.
Makes a lot of sense. It almost makes my question embarrassing. Like, hey, how do we combine these two things? Have you tried doing them together in the same place?
Oh, that makes sense.
People don't think about it though. They don't, because we still see the arts as a commodity instead of a necessity. Even artists, like,
Yeah.
I don't know how many, especially last year, like there was a lot of people who were in my circle who
Mhm.
were getting upset that I was charging people. And I'm like, art supplies cost money, right?
Yeah, right.
But like there is this whole like, oh, I can't invest in myself. I can't invest. But like
Mhm.
we're not seeing that when you invest it in yourself as an artist, you are also investing in the community that you serve.
Mhm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, so even artists have like a little seed of, oh no, this is a commodity, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the reframing, and that, as a business owner and as someone who I consider myself artistic and creative, but I feel like your client, I don't tap into it, or it just feels like it's been brushed to the wayside because there's other more important priorities in life, in my hectic busy life. And yeah, actually, I'm working on creating a new webinar workshop, and I realize that's absolutely the truth, is that I am accessing my creativity with creating a story. You have to create story, and you have to touch on emotions. You have to share your story effectively, and really like reach people. And I don't know why I never made that association. Like, I don't feel like I'm putting out art when I'm like doing business. That's what I'm doing. But I think maybe if I reframed it as like, oh, that might make the process a little more enjoyable, because when I think of art or creativity, it's like fun and versus like work. So I think that could definitely benefit, and maybe even produce something a little more attractive to people, because if it's something that came out of joy versus something that was like work, then it might make a difference.
No, totally. And I've started to do that with all of my book launches as well.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
I've started figuring out the things that I enjoy doing in the
Mhm.
process
Yeah.
and trying to incorporate those in. So now I have a photo shoot for every book release now, just because it's fun.
Ooh, that is
Just because
fun.
it's fun. And it gives me material to use for the promotions, So like trying to figure out, how can I make this creative play when
Mhm.
it's something that I'm resistant to, or something that, I'm not looking forward to doing. So
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Great. What ways do you, like, when someone starts to work with a creative coach, like where do you start typically? Like, what's that starting, or what's your typical client? I know there might be a broad spectrum, but what do you typically see, or what's a common thing that you see, and where do you usually begin with them? I'd be
so
curious.
there's
Yeah.
Oh no, that's fine. Especially since it's kind of like I don't know, it seems like it's a new industry, but
Mhm.
um at least, I was not aware that it was a
Yeah,
thing
I
until like a
wasn't
few
either.
years. Right.
Mhm.
Uh so there's usually two types of um pain points that people approach me on. One
Mhm.
is they have a goal, but they don't know how to meet it. They don't know how to get there, right?
Mhm.
So that, like, let's say a lot of my clients, they want to produce a book, a personal development book,
Oh, okay.
and then they want to launch a course from that, right?
Mhm.
And I've done that for people as well. So one client I had, she was like, I don't even know really what the book's going to be about. And I was like, give me all your journals. And literally, she gave me like 7 journals, and I went through her journals, and I was like, oh, this piece connects to this and this and this. Okay. And so I like, put little Postit notes throughout all the journals, all her material. And I was like, this is your book. So voice to text these in a doc, and then I will format it into a book. And so we did that. And then from that, she's going to launch a course from that book. So
Oh,
that's,
cool.
yeah, so that could be a client will be like, I know I need to do this to get to the next level that I want to do with my art form or with my philosophy. And so I kind of connect the dots for them and then lay out the action steps all the way up until like the book launch and then the course, like putting together that. And then there's the other type of client where they don't know what they want to do. They just want to do something. Like, they just want to do something. I literally this morning got an email from a lady and I was like, oh, I cannot wait to work with this woman. She literally in her subject matter was like, I don't know what the hell I need. I just need something. And I was like, all right, let's figure it out, you know? So it's guidance to like that self-discovery, like, okay, you know, you've got this feeling of, I want to do something, right? So let's tap into it and discover together what that is, right? Because I'm not a guru. I'm here to guide you to yourself, right? And to uncover these things, right? Or connect the dots. So like when it comes to a client like that, it would be, okay, what are you drawn to? Now let's investigate that and figure out, well, why, right? And cultivate that to figure out, is it poetry? If it is poetry, is it activism? Is it teaching? Is it, curating a show? Is it like, do you see yourself doing a college tour, or do you see yourself, in galleries and you have dancers behind your poems and it's in a whole experience, right? So it's figuring out what calls and speaks to them and then showing them the doorways to make that happen in their life. Because a lot of times people will have a vision, but they don't know, like, what's your first step to get there? And so I help with the planning of that. I'm like, okay, well, first we need to find venues. We need to find grants if you want a big show like that. So I help the planning stage as well.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds really beneficial for a lot of people. And I didn't even think of like that book idea. I always, when I'm on my bucket list is to write a book at some point, but when I think about it, I like dread the process. So it's never even begun. But I did establish that I most likely will, actually, I think this was it might've been from Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic too, because I did read that book where I think she was sharing about how Brene Brown would speak her books and have, like, she would go to a beach house with a couple girlfriends, some wine, and then she would just speak her book and then they would transcribe it, like make it pretty. And I was like, yeah, that's because I don't know, I get like the writer's block when I'm just like staring at this blank open document and I'm like, I don't know what to write. But, you ask me a question, I can talk for ages. So I could definitely talk for endless. You tell me the topic, I could talk about it. So
actually, I have a
how it's going to be produced.
Yeah, I have a client right now. That is our work dynamic is she'll say, this is what I want to do. And so I come up with a list of questions and I ask her and I just record her and then I transcribe it. Like it's all about finding your in order to get it done, and reframing what that looks like. Because again, you would think, okay, if I'm going to write a book, you have this image of, okay, you're told like you sit down at the computer or you sit down and you write,
right.
Like, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
As someone who just finished a book, I can tell you right now, I would much rather have gotten drunk and talked to my friends as opposed to what I actually did do. No, but I think it's great. Like, for that's one really great example of like, there's one kind of stereotype of a way to do things. And the type of book I was writing, I didn't need to go sit down. Like, there's no way I could have spoken what I needed to get in there. But there are other ideas that I have had that I have thought about, like, oh, I can make this into a book too. And that would fit perfectly for that. So it's just nice to have extra perspective and to break out of some of these, like, okay, this is the way you have to do it. And I imagine it is incredibly useful to have support in the logistics side of things, because I know I've had a ton of projects that I'm thinking like, oh, this would be so cool, and this would be so cool, and this would be so cool. And I don't really know how to start, so I'm going to work on something else instead that I actually know how to do.
And that's how you get like the Postit notes all over the house and like and the Google Docs that are like 5 pages long of ideas, right? And but like that could also be like fun to have as well. Like I've tried to take the pressure off myself when I do get ideas like that, and just realizing like that's the other thing is like getting real clear on what it is you want because I've come to know that some of the ideas I get aren't for me. I had this whole like publication company I was gonna produce, and I'm like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Like, this is a great idea, but someone else is gonna do this, not me. But yeah, and the logistics is definitely helpful. I love being able to lay out and see it like on paper. It feels like I have the sense of control over it, especially if I can break it apart into pieces. That helps tremendously, especially with things like books. It's like, okay, we don't have to get the whole beginning, middle, and end done like today. It could just be the first 5 pages, and figuring out what works best for clients has been really fun too, because not everybody's the same. Some people work really well with dates. I call them turn in, turn up dates, because I don't like deadline and I don't like due date. It's just like the pregnancy, birth, and baby sounds painful. Let's not call it due date. Let's call it like turn in, turn up, right? Because I feel like language is important. But it's like some people really don't work well with dates. It's triggering for them. They're like, no, I've worked in corporate America. Please don't give me a date, And other people are like, no, I need a date, So that's been really fun to figure out, how people operate and work with them instead of trying to get them into a certain standard,
Yeah. So flipping to the other type of client that you mentioned, the one that doesn't know even where to begin, and maybe someone who might describe themselves as like a non-artsy type of person, what would you say to them as far as like, wanting to like do some sort of visual art, and why that's beneficial for them in getting that process started?
Definitely, I would tell them to start a Pinterest board or start looking at photos that speak to you, and then ask yourself why. Like, why do they speak to you? Is it the color palette? Is it the style? And then start trying and just see like what you enjoy and take note of it, and what you don't, and taking the pressure off. Sometimes with students, what I'll do is I'll do speed painting with them, where I'm like, you got 5 minutes, and then we're switching them, and it's just to let go of this idea of like, it has to be perfect. I love it. Like, it does not. Like, actually, perfection is one of the supremacy mindset traits, is perfection. Like, so know that when you let go of perfection, you're doing better for, America. But but like, it is though. It is. It's so oppressive. It's so oppressive. Like, and I'm not saying, half-ass your work, but really allow yourself to play. Like, it's not life or death here. It's art. Like, you can always paint over it. You can always start again. So I'll suggest that, and try to really cultivate the idea of, if you're not enjoying the process, then you need to start all over anyway, because it's all about the process. And me and a lot of my friends who are artists talk about that as well. Is like, you don't really, when you think back about your projects, you don't really think about the art opening. You think about you in your studio when you were painting it. Like, those are the happy moments, it was the climb to get to the mountain, so yeah.
One of the parallels that really worked for me when it came to thinking about some of this art creation stuff is realizing that, even the highest level professional at whatever, whoever you think the best is, whoever that is, first of all, some huge percent of people are not going to like any of their work. And second of all, you probably don't even like some major percent of their work, right? So like, you're going to have these hits and misses no matter what. There is no perfection point to even shoot for. Like, you might think like, oh, this one song is basically perfect. But then if you look at the whole rest of the catalog that this person has, you're not going to love everything else the same amount. So it really helped me a lot to tap more into like like you were saying, this process side of like, okay, I just generate things. Some things will land for some people, some things won't. Some things might not land for most people, and that's okay. But like that helped me a lot. And then this other piece of really, and you talked about it, but like really digging into what am I making this for? Or like why? What is the point? What is the driving force behind this? Because in some instances it was for consumption by some other audience. And so I was thinking about like, how do I make it appealing to them? But there's been a lot of times where it's just, oh, this is enjoyable. And the more tightly I've held on to, it's enjoyable and needs to be perfect. Perfect for who? For what? Like what? Why am I clinging to this so hard? So I just wanted to filter in a little bit of my experience with that same set of ideas.
Yeah, definitely. And it is this whole like concept too of like allowing it to be out in the world and for it to live on its own. You know, there's a artist in Charlotte, North Carolina called his name is Jim Love, I think it is. But he says, like, after I create it, it is none of my business what people think about it. I did my duty. I put it out there into the world. It is none of my business what someone else has to say about it. And I'm like, wow, like that philosophy really changed the way I see stuff too, because we see the art as the artist a lot of times. And that gets all into cancel culture and everything else. Like, is the art the artist? And it's like, is it though? Like it's out there now. It's like, it's not it's of the person, but it isn't the person, you know what I mean? And like detaching it from yourself and allowing it to be out in the world to do whatever it needs to do for someone, you know? But I always say that too. It's like, you can't compare like Michelangelo to Picasso either, you know, like everybody has their own style and everybody has their own voice. My poetry mama, I call her my poetry mama, Devonna Wyatt always said that there's no such thing as a bad poem, just a poem that hasn't found its audience, you know? And yeah, and it's all about, like you were saying, like by whose standard, you know, because Nickelback, somebody somewhere is listening to Nickelback. Why? I don't know, but somebody out there is like, yeah, this is good. And I'm just like, you know, so I mean, you can't really compare art, you know, and expression. And I would also say that like it will change your life. Like I do a lot of sensory work, and it's because it teaches gratitude. It genuinely will make you grateful to be alive, and it makes you feel alive, right? I've struggled with depression and a lot of things when I was younger because trauma, you know, biker gang, yeah, you know, all of that. But it's like, if you can look at light, shape, texture, shadow, all these artistic elements, right, that you need to be able to cultivate in order to draw or, you know, develop an artistic practice, you will start being like, wow, you will see things, even the things that you see every day, in a whole new light. And then if you go even deeper, you can start doing memory recall. Like, I can touch this desk that's in front of me and be like, okay, yeah, it's wood, it's smooth, whatever, and then go about my day. But if I really cultivate like sensory practice through the arts, I can like touch this table and go, oh wow, okay, that's my grandmother's hands. Now all of a sudden I'm in my grandma's kitchen and I can smell her cooking, and like now I've got this whole memory that's going to be a poem about like my grandmother being a tree and this desk that's keeping me up and all of this, right? Like now I have this whole metaphor and this whole experience from something that I see every day, but I'm not experiencing it to 100%, right? And that, I would say, is why if you struggle with depression, if you struggle with anything like that, the arts can completely change your life, because you're able to make those connections and see the beauty that is underneath the surface that we can't normally see when we're blinded by all of these external things, you know.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. I kind of see it as maybe another form of meditation in a way to do art. And that meditation or mindfulness practice is to become present in the moment. And, you know, because when we're depressed or anxious, we're often caught up in all of these thoughts that weigh us down. And, if we can just really be with the present moment, the sensations, the sensory things that you mentioned, that can really just like draw our attention to like, oh, what does, I feel like my skin is warm right now because it's freaking hot right now. And I just noticed, I just actually did this meditation, and the leader, this different meditation today, and the leader was just having you notice the subtle sounds of the room. And I was like, there's nothing going on in the room. Oh, there's my dog slightly snoring. Just like these subtle things, like his breathing, or like I just heard the jingle of my earring, and I was like, oh, these like such little things that go unnoticed, but when we just like stay present, we can like experience so much if we pay attention.
And a lot of people, if they have experienced trauma, they freak out when someone says be present, because they think that it means that they have to be inside their body, and sometimes they don't feel safe inside their body. But like I always tell them that, there are these tools that you get. There's survival patterns, right? Basically, I think that was a term coined by Maston Kipp. His book Claim Your Power or whatever. That book is incredible. I highly suggest that. That book actually led me to quit my full-time job years ago, and was like, I said I'm out. I'm like, Maston Kipp done changed my life. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So there's these survival patterns, and what led me to hyperfocus and sensory work was trauma. Like when I was younger, I would disassociate and hyperfocus. I would like everything else would black out, and I'd just be focused on like this glass on a table with the way the light hit it, and I would be like, oh wow, that's beautiful. I'd be like staring at this glass and like write this whole poem about this glass on this table while my parents or something's going on over here arguing drunk, and like, and I just, that was a practice that I developed. And it's like, you can be present without having to be in your body if it doesn't feel safe.
Oh, yeah.
And then you get to a point where you can then go internal and be in your body. And that has been a long practice for me, because I was well taken care of, I was well loved, but there was a lot of like danger in the environment. It's weird, right? Because it's like these two realities existing at the same time. It's like I'm completely safe, completely not safe at the same time, But as I've gone older, I've realized like I used to have a problem with being put. So meditation was really hard for me because I had to be still and I had to be inside myself, right? And then I had this amazing experience meditating. I did this like Kundalini yoga meditation under like a lunar eclipse thing, and it was intense, and I was not ready for it because I don't meditate like that. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do this really intensive meditation when I don't really practice meditating. This is going to be a great experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. Right, I'm in it, and I had this amazing experience of like running within myself, and there was like this horse that took me into this like desert and like threw me up in the sky, and I felt endless inside. And I remember having that feeling when I was little, and I was on Route 66. And if you've ever been on Route 66, like it just goes on and on and on and on and on, and it's just like you literally can like feel the expansion in your body. And that's how I felt in the meditation. And then I realized, oh wow, like my body is never not in motion. Like I'm never trapped. Like that concept of being trapped. Like I'm never still. My blood is moving, my lungs are moving, and inside myself is endless. Like I can go wherever. Like so this concept of like being trapped or being still or being held down, it doesn't even exist. And that completely changed my life. So so meditation really does help. And like you can get to a point where you feel safe inside your body, but it's not something that happens overnight, right? Like, and that's why cultivating artistic practices and sensory practice can help heal trauma.
Yeah, on that note, I think a lot of people feel like meditation is one very specific thing, and it's
Yeah.
also the only way to get a lot of the benefits. But it really falls under this umbrella of like mindfulness practices, right? And I thought that the memory recall piece that you brought up, where you kind of are sitting in some of these memories and thinking about the sensory experience, is a really cool exercise that I've not heard about before, because it's like mindfulness, but it's not quite present with the current moment. Anyway, I just was really happy that you shared that, because it's something different than what I've heard or experienced. And I think it's really useful for people to be exposed to more ideas or more ways to look at mindfulness, because a lot of the time it comes packaged inside of meditation when that's not necessarily how things need to be.
No, totally. And it's the same with like all those sensory techniques too. I run across somebody, I can't remember where they're from, but they had done an interview with somebody about sensory work. And I watched the interview and I was like, because I was interested, I was like, oh, well, maybe they do what I teach, right? Or, what I help guide people into. And it was not the same thing at all. It was not the same thing at all. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe not. But it's very much this whole reframing of, what these terms mean. Like when someone says disassociation, they think, oh, that's trauma response. And yes, it can be, but it also can be a skill that you learn in order to cultivate your creativity, and it doesn't mean that disassociation, when people think of that, they think, they're outside of their body, they've blanked out. And it's like, we disassociate all the time. Like if you've ever like zoned out and you've been in what I call the fuzzy place, right? And like you're just in a restaurant somewhere, and then you realize you're accidentally looking at someone, and because they're looking at you, like, what are you looking at?
Like,
right? Like we've all done that. We've all been in the fuzzy place, right?
Yeah.
The only difference is you're being intentional, right? You're being intentional, and you're being like, okay, I'm gonna look at like this. I don't know what's around me. I'm going to look at this cup of coffee, right? I'm going to look at this cup of coffee until I fall in love with this cup of coffee. And like, I can write a love letter to this cup of coffee and talk about the texture, the light, the shadow of it, take an inventory of all the things that I would describe this cup as, until I actually feel grateful that the cup is sitting here in my presence, and if you can do that, then you can start doing it with yourself. So then you can start like building this self-love and appreciation for self, which is incredible, because a lot of people, that's where they get stuck at. They get stuck at like, I can appreciate other people, I can appreciate things I have in my life, but it's harder for me to appreciate myself. Yeah,
definitely. Awesome. Well, this has been a really interesting and fun conversation. Definitely realize, I feel like I've been missing my creative part of me, because I was associating, doing art, like singing or dancing. But I realize it's actually all over my life when you really look at it. And that's great. I mean, I still want to do more of what traditional arts that I keep putting off, but I think this is a good reminder that it is like part of us. But yeah, that being said, as we wrap up today, is there anything you'd like to plug, Shane, before we do?
Yes, I'm releasing my trauma informed care training in May. So it'll be virtual. I tried it out at the beginning of this year, virtual, and it went really well. So I'm going to offer that. I do have a time management course that is up on my website called Time Mapping, because we're also trying to dismantle the patriarchy. So no time management.
Love it.
It's a joke, but really it's more about like mapping out like what you want to do, So I have that on there. I also just released a book called Road Hunger, and it's about wanderlust and having a hunger for something that you cannot name nor tame. And so it's fun. It comes with like a road trip playlist and a scavenger hunt and all of that. It's a fun one. But yeah, so lots of stuff. Just hit at me at my website. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, and we'll link her website and her social media handles below, so be sure to follow her and check her out. And yes, thank you so much for being on our show, Shane.
Thank you. This was awesome. And follow the podcast.
Thank you. Yes.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.